I'm going to make the white flour bread into a round loaf and the whole wheat one into an oblong loaf. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then we'll do the same thing. Okay, now I'm just going to kind of roll it to elongate it. Now here's the other thing that they do that's different from the New York Times version. They use parchment paper for rising the dough, and then when it's done rising, for transporting the dough to the hot baking vessel. So what they suggest is taking a skillet and putting a piece of parchment paper over it. I get my oil sprayer here. And misting the surface of the parchment paper with oil and placing the dough on there. And then misting the top of the dough a little bit. And covering it with plastic and letting it rise for 2 hours. And I'll do the same thing with the whole wheat loaf. I don't really think you need to use the cast iron or a skillet for this. I think it would work just as well on a flat surface, but I'm just following their instructions. You know what? I'm just going to do the flat surface on this one because the loaf's a little long for the skillet. This is the first time I've done an oblong version of this loaf, of this recipe. So, cover that. And they're both going to rise for 2 hours, but I want to have my oven preheated and ready for the bread to go in 2 hours. So I'm going to set my timer for an hour and 25 minutes so that I can preheat the oven for 35 minutes. And it'll be ready to go in 2 hours. And yes, I did forget to mist the top of the oblong loaf. And that's just to keep the plastic from sticking to it. Okay, we're an hour and 25 minutes into the 2-hour proofing period, and this is where we want to put our Dutch oven, or La Cloche, or La Cloches in my case, into the oven to preheat. And it's going to take at least a half an hour. I give it 35 minutes to fully preheat at 500 degrees. We'll set the timer for 35 minutes and come back then. Now this is the fun part. The oven's ready, and with the parchment paper technique, you can easily lift the whole thing up and lower it gently into your Dutch oven or whatever with minimal risk of deflating the dough or burning yourself. It goes like this. Pick it up, lower it into the Dutch oven, and cover it. But first, I'm going to score the loaf. Yet another difference from the New York Times method. I'll sprinkle it with a little flour. And with a razor blade or a sharp serrated knife, I'm just going to make one about ½ inch deep cut across the top. Sometimes you have to drag the blade across the top a couple of 3 times to get the depth you want without ripping the dough too much. So that's fine. And then for the oblong loaf, I'll go something like this. This is just a cosmetic thing. The flour. A few scores across the top. First I'll do the oblong one. And all I'm going to do is drop the loaf with the parchment paper and all right in there. Cover it. And do the same thing with the round one. I don't even really have to take off the gloves, but it's kind of hard to work with them on. It's very easy, and you do not risk deflating the dough or burning yourself with this technique. And now I'm going to lower the temperature to 425 and bake for 30 minutes with the lids on, and then bake for 10 more with the lids off. And after 30 minutes, we'll just take the lids off and go for another 10. Now all ovens vary a little bit in how they bake, so the only really reliable test of whether your bread is done baking or not is to measure the internal temperature with an instant read thermometer. And the temperature should be in the 200 to 210 degree range. Now this one already looks done, so I'm going to measure it first. And I can see already that it's over 200 degrees. So that's coming out. And then I'll measure this one, although it looks like it could use a few more minutes. Yeah, we'll give it about 3 more minutes. It measured about 195. And after this few more minutes, this one's done and ready to come out. Then we'll just let them cool on a wire rack completely. Now, since the dough in this recipe is not as wet as the New York Times recipe, you're going to get a better rise in the bread. See how lofty it is? It really rises well. Both loaves did that. But you're also going to get a tighter crumb, smaller holes in the interior. I mean, it's still nice, but it's not the huge open holes that a lot of people like. So you also don't get quite as thick and crusty a crust. I mean, it's a nice crust, but it's just not real thick. So it's a different kind of bread, and it's light and soft. It's also really good tasting, really unique tasting because of the beer and vinegar. And so because of the smaller holes and the softer bread and the less crusty crust, this recipe converts really well to a sandwich loaf. So I'm going to make a short video showing how I convert this recipe to a sandwich loaf. It's real easy, and you'll find that below this one. Let's see what the whole wheat bread looks like. It looks like the white loaf, only not as white, which is about what you'd expect. This is actually a little bit more of a open crumb than I normally get or would expect to see, so I'm not sure why, but we'll go with it. So anyway, try this recipe. It's like hopefully you've seen it's easy, and it's pretty fast, and it's really quite good.